Thank you very much. Thank you for those of you who've stayed as well. And it's lovely to be back in Antwerp. And it was only when I saw Vincent's photographs last night I realised how long it had been since I was last in Antwerp. But that was actually quite scary. So what I'm going to talk about today is approaches that we and others have taken to exploring physical management for people living with CMT. The hospital I work at Queen Square is very much, we deal with people who come who are adults, but our colleagues in Great Ormond Street, we work closely with them as well for children. So just for rehabilitation might be a new concept for some people here. So we go to the World Health Organization definition. So rehabilitation is a big umbrella term for lots of different interventions that we can use, that we can optimize people's function, so people can live with the conditions and interact with their environment. And that can help a child, an adult, older person to be as independent as possible, but also have meaningful life roles. I think that's really, really key in what we try and do. Really what the WHO is saying is that it's an essential part of universal health coverage, along with how we promote good health, treatment and palliative care. So when we look at rehabilitation, you can split it into different types of rehabilitation, different goals of rehabilitation. One of them might be preventative, so how we might maintain function for as long as possible. There's restorative rehab. We're trying to get improvements, and sometimes that might be after somebody has an acute illness and they're recovering, after a surgery, etc. There's supportive care, so actually how can we support people with strategies, with devices to maintain independence or improve function. And then there's also palliative rehab for end-of-life care, which we tend to see in other conditions. So because of that, I'm just really going to focus a little bit more on the first three. The other thing that we do, I'm a physiotherapist, and allied health professionals, we often use this framework to understand how a person lives with a condition in the context of where they are and who they are. So this is the ICF. So we think about a condition or a disease in terms of how it affects the body function or structure. That might be the muscles, it could be the nerves, it could be the tendons. Then actually how, if there are any issues there, how that affects people's activity, walking, being able to scroll on your phone, etc. And then the wider than that is then how do those activities allow people to be able to participate in work roles or be parents or contribute to society. But we should always remember that there are different contexts that will change that for individuals depending on the environment, where they live, other factors about them. So that these contextual factors that are always really important when we think about how we deliver rehab, because it's not always one size fits all. So how does that apply in CMT? So we have the primary disease processes that we're hearing a lot about over the last couple of days. And then in terms of body structure functions, I don't need to tell a lot of you here, but we see weakness and atrophy, sensory impairment, changes in the musculoskeletal system, deconditioning, etc., etc. So these different elements can then impact on how people can do certain activities like walking or different daily activities. And then these can then dictate how people can then stay mobile in the community, take on those different roles, as I mentioned earlier. And so, as we've been hearing over the last few days, there's lots of work being done to look at how can the primary disease process be addressed, be interrupted, be reversed, maybe one day. So there's a lot of work going on there, as we know. I think where we can come in terms of physical management is thinking about the impact of some of these other changes that happen to do with the body structure, the function, but even things like mood and confidence. And so how do we what might be the aims then, using this framework to try and target what we think is important? So if we're looking at body structure function, it might be that we want to prevent deconditioning, improve general health, reduce those comorbidities that can happen because people might be less active or have greater injuries. Can we possibly even reduce the rate of decline? Big question mark. With activity, can we, again, physical functioning, can we improve functional performance in terms of how far people could walk, for example, or participate in work activities? And then it might be also how can we improve physical and psychological well-being? That's a big area. So we might want to use these rehab goals to address some of that. So I'm a physiotherapist. There's a few physiotherapists here, which is great, actually. So some of the key areas that we look at when we're working with people with CMT, we might, for example, be looking at strengthening exercises, the proximal distal muscles. We might be looking at aerobic exercise or that cardiopulmonary training. Also, we might be looking at skilled activities. So that might be because walking patterns, walking is incredibly skilled, and so is balance. We are top heavy. When we stand, we swing around like an inverted pendulum, you know, and it requires a lot of neural control to do that, as well as the complications, you know, in trying to understand the hand because of dexterity in the sensory parts of the hand. There are lots of other areas that we and our other allied health professional colleagues also explore to do with orthotics, to do with managing fatigue, managing pain, and also looking at well-being from a psychological perspective and the social aspects. I won't go into that today. I have half an hour and not 3 hours. So we'll just keep it at the top 3 if that's okay, but I'm happy to talk about some of the others in another time. So if we look at strengthening exercises, you know, we need to think really carefully, and I'm really passionate about this, that sometimes physiotherapists, they'll go in and they'll give something out. They haven't really thought about what are they seeing, what does that person need, and you know, they'll give a sheet of exercises and then the person looks and says, oh, these are too difficult, I'm not doing them. So we think we need to be very precise about what we're trying to target. So my colleague Jasper Morrows, many of you will know Jasper, did this beautiful work in MRI in Lancet Neurology. And when I first looked at that, I was really struck at the two images at the top. So the two left-hand images are the cross-section through the thigh and the lower ones through the calf for somebody who doesn't have CMT. And then on the right, it's somebody who does have CMT. Now, I looked at the thigh at the top, and you can see that the muscle in the thigh at the top is not so affected. You don't see the fatty infiltration as much as the lower slide, but we can see it's smaller. So that, I think, is what we're seeing, is that secondary disuse atrophy that I mentioned on the other slide. And actually then we've got one of these dynamometers, so we can look at muscle strength in when the leg is moving and when it's static, you know, get quite detailed measures. And this is some data that we collected. Magdalena, who's in the audience, she collected a lot of this. And we can see that compared to people who don't have CMT, the muscles, and so the KE is the quadriceps, it's the knee extensor, the knee flexors here, and we can see that even when they're not so affected by the primary condition, they're still weaker, but probably because of this secondary deconditioning. So the muscle is smaller because it's perhaps not being used as much, or we need to, you know, think about how we can optimize its use. So there might be potential for improvement there. And so what might be causing that? So we did a study quite a long time ago now, where we put very big activity monitors. They're much smaller and better now. But we found that people were doing fewer steps per day with CMT compared to people who were matched who didn't have CMT. And then in a later study, we also did some more activity monitoring, and we found that the steps per day seemed to have a moderate correlation with actually the strength of the quadriceps muscles at the front. So that might be dictating how far people will walk in a day. And also, interestingly, we found that also correlated, quite a slightly stronger correlation with people's fitness, a VO2 peak. When we look at cardiopulmonary fitness, we get people on the bike, look at oxygen exchange, that's an indicator of that. So actually, strengthening these muscles could have broader effects. So in the study so far, what's been done is that people have used weights, for example, or body weight, so we can see the squat underneath there. And so there's actually been quite a few studies looking at how can we reverse some of this reduction in strength, particularly in those proximal muscles, the ones at the tops of the legs, tops of the arms. And so there's been systematic review, and there's been a couple of other reviews, the one most recently from Brazil, which found that strengthening exercise for those muscles, there's actually the evidence is strengthening, but there's quite good evidence coming through of strengthening effect with those muscles. So that fits into that preventative and perhaps also restorative as well. We can actually make people better in terms of maybe walk more in the day and influence some of those relationships we saw in the other slides. So And what might be the mechanisms? I'm really annoying. I always want to know why. Why is this happening? So we know that when people have looked over the years at the effect, you strengthen a muscle, what changes over time and over a few weeks. So initially, that early change in strength that you get is actually not that the muscle hasn't changed at that point. It's just that there's more pathways open. There's more what we call central activation. So that's the neural part. The frequency of the activation of the muscle fibers increases as well. And then eventually, about 8 to 12 weeks, then the muscle itself starts to hypertrophy. It gets bigger. So I think in these muscles, in these proximal muscles, that's probably what we're seeing. We haven't done any studies yet with MRI. Not that I've seen. There might be some going on to see if that actually is the case. But certainly you get the change in strength. But what about the distal muscles, the smaller muscles? Now, there's been much, much less work done. And I pull this one out because it's the biggest one to date. And it was Josh Burns and the team in Sydney did this a few years ago now, where this was the FAST trial where they had children with CMT1A. They used this cuff and put weights in it. And they got these kids to do this dorsiflexion exercise. They were lifting up the front of the foot. For 6 months, I don't know how they motivated children and teenagers to do it for that long, but there was some magic that they performed. And I think my favourite part of this paper is this graph, because what you see in green is just the normal natural history over 2 years. Red is the group who did the exercise but didn't have the weights in the cuff, so it was a sham exercise, so you just didn't have the load. And then the blue is they did it for 6 months. So here you can see that they got, actually, this is the dorsiflexion strength on the y-axis, so they got 30% stronger after a year. So that was even after they finished doing the exercise. So this speaks to perhaps those neural changes, because a muscle will hypertrophy if you stop using it. But it was also sustained over 2 years. One of the caveats, though, is that these children, they were not super weak. They had grade 4 out of 5 weakness in the MRC. And one thing that the team did, they did do MRI with this to see what changed. And actually, it was reassuring because there was no detriment to the muscle with the training, which is a good thing to know and understand. But they didn't see an increase in the muscle size. So again, I've talked to the team about this and, well, what do you think was happening? And this is, again, we think, well, maybe this was the neural change rather than the hypertrophy, because the muscle was already weakened. There's still a lot to unpick there and other work that I think could be done. So shifting now to the aerobic exercise. This is the cardiopulmonary training. This is Andy and Liz in our lab, which looks very tidy there, actually. It's got a very busy place now. So here Andy's on the bike, and they're measuring the gas exchange to see how much oxygen is he taking up as he's doing the exercise. And what we found in our study is that with CMT, it's about the peak that you can get of oxygen exchange in the group that we looked at was about 80% of what we'd expect to see. So that indicates that the fitness was a bit less, probably again because of what we were seeing in terms of physical activity. And so we found that, as we see here, that correlated with how far people could walk in 6 minutes. So it's quite a common 6-minute walk test is quite common. We found that did relate to that as well. And so there have been many fewer studies of aerobic training. For a long time, there was just this one with just 8 people doing interval training on an exercise bike, and they did see some improvements in oxygen uptake in that, but it was very small. We did a larger study a few years ago of 28 people. We did a crossover trial so that we would get people to detrain and then go into the training arm. I won't do a crossover trial of exercise again because it's very difficult to get people to detrain. They don't like it. So 2 arms all the way. But what was quite interesting was this, is that we found that there was an improvement with the training condition. And we did this in people's local gyms. So out in the community, we trained up the local gym exercise trainers to actually deliver this. And I think that's really important because we're all in little islands of specialist centres. So actually, how do we upskill people out in the community to be able to support people to get on and off the bikes and to be able to do this and do this safely and address any concerns? Then moving to skilled activities. Now, this again, there's been quite a lot of work done in balance, and this is just an example of some that we did. So we had people in the balance lab. We look at how people sway around, measure it, and get them to do different tasks and measure it, and then correlate it with strength and that sort of thing. And this is a preliminary model that we've put together. So Magda and I did this work a few years ago, where we tracked people's, how often people fell in 6 months prospectively, and then looked at what predicted that. So some of our static balance measures predicted how many times people fell. Some of our dynamic ones did, and also visual dependence. So for those of you who don't know what visual dependence is that when we're standing and then we close our eyes, we measure the sway with eyes open and eyes closed, because that gives you an indication of how much of an impact sensation is. And when we look at, well, what predicted static balance and dynamic balance, it was muscle weakness. Distal weakness for the static balance and proximal muscle weakness had it. So the strength of the quads dictated how far people could reach forward, for example. And so for example, so one of the things that Magda's trying to submit this for publication at the moment. So can we give a bit more sensory input? Do it using insoles that vibrate, or by using an ankle brace to give a bit more feedback to the ankle? So this is a small study, early results, but there's some quite interesting things coming through. So hopefully that'll be out soon to read. And then there's also exercise training. So the lovely study that was done across many sites in Italy of treadmill training. So here you're training the skilled activity of gait using a treadmill. I think with body weight support is quite a nice way of doing it, so people's balance are not going to fall on the treadmill. And so with this study, there were 26 people with CMT1A who did just stretching or proprioceptive exercise, and then 27 who did this treadmill training plus the stretching and proprioceptive exercises. And they got improved walking speed, walking endurance. But what was really interesting was that there was improved balance. I think Angelo's gone now, but it's a shame because we talked about it afterwards, and we were wondering about whether or not the treadmill, people having to react to the treadmill, was actually a training in itself. And we call that perturbation training in the sort of gait and balance world. And there are other examples of perturbation training. So again, I think one of our colleagues, Antonio Nardoni, did this nice work on a platform that moved, and he did a bigger study, but there were 7 people with CMT included in that to look at how people adapted to that, and there were some improvements. And also how people do their dynamic training. Again, a small study that was done using a device that meant people could reach out of their base of support. And again, with this one, they also did normal, sort of, what I say normal physio training, but balance exercises, and actually both groups improved. So doing something helps. So one of the things that Magda and Louis, who's the other physio from our team who's here, did was a proof of concept of a home-based training. So a lot of neurophysio delivery in the UK is done in the community, and it's going to be even more so now with our new government. They're looking at taking rehab into the community. So here, Louis would go in, work with them for 12 weeks, go in monthly, and get people to do these exercises. But what was really key here, he didn't just go, here's the exercises you need to do. What he did was he negotiated with them. Okay, so this is the aim. Where's the best place for us to do it? Where can we? Have we got anything around that? When's the best time of day for you to do this? And what we did this through what we call a self-management framework. I'll come back to a little bit later about self-management, but we did it very intentionally in partnership with the people who were involved in the study. And from a very sort of biomechanical perspective, we saw improvements in the sway speed, so that reduced with training when people were in the posture lab. But also we did some functional balance measures. So there's something called the Berg, the best test. There are different sort of multi-item performance measures, and they all improved as well. Actually, quite big effect sizes, more than we were expecting. And then I just wanted to mention this because I haven't gone into hands, because there's very little on hands as a skilled movement. So just some work in the Netherlands showed that dexterity was very affected by muscle strength and sensation. And then Valeria Prado, who's a physiotherapy colleague in Geneva, she did this very small pilot study. And I keep saying to her, we need to expand this because there's very little on actually how we train hands, bearing in mind what Angela was saying yesterday about avoiding overwork weakness as well. So I think there's still a huge amount of work to be done in hands. Of course, that's great. We've got the principles are there. We know what actually show promise, might actually be helpful. But then what we found was, this is going back to our study we did in exercise training. afterwards, we contacted people to find out who was still exercising. And 28 of the 48 people agreed to a telephone interview, but only 12 of them were still exercising for various reasons, to do with work, to do with gym membership. And actually what people told us that what really helped them when they were doing the study was the support they got from the physiotherapists and from the gym trainers. So in some other work I did with a UK collaboration, we looked at, actually, this is really important, to try and understand what affects engagement in us living active lifestyles. And this was across rare neurological diseases. So this is busy, so I'll take it bit by bit. First of all, there's the environmental organisation factors. And in the green boxes, this is what seems to be more specific to rare diseases. In the white boxes, that's common across neurological diseases. So it's about our healthcare services, so people's access to specialist services. They didn't have very good communication. This was sort of we did a series of interviews and some surveys for this through the patient charities and then wider. And also there's this poor understanding of rare conditions in services as well, because often services in the UK are very much designed for rehab after stroke, a single incident condition, and not for long-term conditions where people might have different touch points that they would benefit from. And then we have these interpersonal factors and intrapersonal. So intrapersonal is about the person living with the condition themselves. And people there were telling us, I don't always know what I should be doing, what to do, when and how, what's the risk versus the benefit. And then the interpersonal is how people interact with their family, with their healthcare providers, fitness professionals. And again, knowledge of rare neurological conditions wasn't there, risk versus benefit. So we've now taken a slight step. So I'm always very interested in the mechanisms, but we realised that actually what was key here was how we change behaviour. And I'm not talking about just the behaviour of the person living with the condition, but the behaviour of the therapist working with them. So with behaviour change interventions, it's a whole big field, and there's a big group at UCL do some beautiful work in this area. And they've developed this COM-B model. And so if you're trying to, the target might be for people to be more active, we might think about how do we intervene physically with that. But there might be other things. It might be psychological, it might be motivation, it might be education. How do we target that? So there's a way that we ask questions to then put in those behaviour change interventions. So going back to our little diagram here, if we think about the interpersonal factors, and actually how we support people who have these challenges. So I mentioned self-management earlier. So self-management, again, is an area I've had to learn lots about on the way. But actually, this is a framework of it's not just handing somebody a leaflet. This is a whole framework of support. So we work with people to solve problems, to set goals, to people to do some self-discovery as they try things, trying to find the best resource and taking action. And it's based on work by from some years ago now by Bandura, the social cognitive theory. So Louis, as part of his PhD, examined actually self-management strategies for people living with neuromuscular conditions, and that included quite a few people with CMT. And so he asked these key questions about, what are the strategies that people use, what are the barriers, the challenges, what people's preferences for the support that we might want to give them, have that lived experience understanding, and actually how it's received and how it's currently experienced. And this was through a really big qualitative study actually, and hopefully it'll be out, it's about to be submitted, so you can read about it more if you want to know. But just to give you a snapshot, this is Louis' mind, he tells me. It's a mind map, sorry, not just a mind. But here, these are the themes that came from those interviews. So there are key things here that are to do with what keeps me going, what holds me back, and it might be social, it might be physical, it might be psychological. But just to pull out some of them here, so around the social, there might be social comparison, people haven't heard of it, what are the tips that people can give each other. From the psychological side, thinking about staying positive, as we heard earlier, setting goals, planning ahead, strategies. With the physical, actually, how can assistive devices help? How to manage fatigue, how technology can be helpful. And again, we're hearing about that a lot this weekend. So we developed a supported self-management intervention across neuromuscular diseases. And we did this, it was co-designed and co-produced with people living with CMT, muscular dystrophies, etc. in some of these workshops. It was just wonderful work to be involved with. And so the people there decided what they wanted and what advice would go in, what family stories about where they can talk about their experiences. And we've developed a book, and we give this out regularly in clinic. And also the therapists, the nurses, and the AHPs are trained in the self-management theories to then be able to optimize how people use this. And it's to do with how the language we use, you know, what's gone well for you in the last year, or what's your priority today. And so there's the website, and there are tools there for people to be able to set goals for things that they want to do. And there's videos of conversations between people. Here there's two young women talking about, you know, relationships, or being boring with their friends, you know, and not caving to social pressures and things like that. And these it's just really insightful because it goes beyond what we talk about in clinic. And so, as part of another part of Louis' PhD, he did the ADAPT NMD trial, where we evaluated actually how we delivered this through the therapy and nursing sessions within our centre. And it was through looking at the sort of early efficacy, early effect of feasibility, but also actually what are the factors about implementing it through a centre like ours. And so what was really interesting that came through, coming back to healthcare professionals, is that, and Louis presented this in other conferences, about trust and reliance that people have on specialist services and on knowledgeable therapists. And so that was really key, and it fitted with the framework that we did for the rare disease work as well. So if there's no knowledge, then people lose trust in their local providers. So we have to think about that, and I think this is where we can really leverage technology to do that. So this is very busy, but I'm going to talk you through it, and this is how we're trying to do it now. So as you've seen, I'm very interested in balance, and we've developed this intervention through Magda's work, and then bringing in Louis' work as well to understand. So we're doing the Better Balance CMT project, and so here we're going to look at how we deliver that training that seemed to work in our feasibility study, but thinking about it through behaviour change and through supported self-management. So we're working with Bridges, the co-development, co-production group, with the Agency for Good, who are a digital developer, and we're going to create this digital platform with patients and also with physios who are going to be using it. So our patients will tell us the look and feel. If they want videos, that's helpful. Then we'll do the videos. If they want cartoons, we'll be guided very much by what will work best for them. So there'll be two parts of it. We're going to have a physiotherapy portal, which will also co-design with physios. It's going to be education and training in there. On that, it might be about balance mechanisms and rehabilitation approaches, but also principles of self-management. And then once they've completed that and they've been assessed, physios love a certificate of CPD, so they'll get their downloadable certificate. They'll be happy with that. And then they can download in the contents of the training protocols, risk assessment, because this is going to be done at home, in people's homes, and then ideas for content for face-to-face sessions and remote sessions, because it'll be blended. And then we're also going to have a patient portal. Oh, I've gone too far, sorry. Patient portal, where again we'll have some education, because the people themselves wanted to know more as well about what they can do, when and how, and what underpins it. Then when they've gone through that, then there's content for them. This might be videos, it might be where people have talked about what's been successful for them, like in the Bridges book. And then ultimately we want them to come together in a partnership to work together, a bit like Louis did, but we can't clone Louis thousands of times, so we've got to upskill those physios to be able to do that and work in partnership with the patient to decide what will work best for them. And it's a 12-week study. And if you want to know more about the actual trial, I was going to say go and look at my poster, but we've had to take them down. But if anybody wants that, because this is the actual, we're doing a phase 3 trial. It's a hybrid trial of efficacy and implementation. So if anyone wants to know more, then let me know. So that's how we're trying to do it, to combine. It's a big task of combining from the sort of the mechanisms and the physiological mechanisms to behaviour change and living well. But I think that's where we need to go now, because I think we're gathering that early stage information, but then we need to know actually how to get to sort of change the hearts and minds of the people delivering, but also think about how it works in different systems. And I'm very aware as well, this is very much in a UK context, so how it translates to other countries will be quite interesting. So that's just to finish off, just to show you the lovely HP team at Queen Square who are either clinical academics or they work in our research delivery team, and our wonderful collaborators around UCL and UCLH. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Gita, for this nice session. Are there any questions? Yes, Arabella?
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, I want to congratulate you for your work because it's amazing, and I'm really, really happy to say that I'm happy that such studies are being done. I'm a patient with Charcot-Marie-Tooth type 1A myself, and this year I was so exhausted, so tired that I actually took my boys who also have CMT, and we started going to the gym. And I must admit, even if it was like for 6 months on and off, because I had to travel a lot and not always having a gym nearby, but I honestly say I think I regained back maybe 3-4 years of my life at least. So I didn't even realize, first of all, it is addictive. And it's not the same. I tried doing exercises at home for sure. It doesn't work for me and for many of us. But going to a gym, even if I didn't have a personal trainer who knew about CMT, unfortunately I had one that was a champion in bodybuilding, so he kind of worked us very hard. But honestly, the way I improved my strength in my arms, my stability, everything, my muscles, I mean, it's really something that should be more maybe put out there for patients to know.
Yeah.
I also experience normal physical rehabilitation, and it's not the same results. They are not, because this is much quicker. But I also have a question. So this was a comment, and I thank you for this study. And for sure we need to be in contact. But I have a question regarding how do you explain that all my life I was able to walk better and to function better late in the evening and at night. So I can walk much better late in the afternoon, late in the evening, but not in the morning. Because I ask a lot of patients and they don't tell me this. They say they feel that their walking is easier in the morning. Thank you.
Can I address point one first?
Yeah.
What we want to do is actually use testimonies like yours to encourage other people who might not have the confidence to go to the gym like you did, and who might be unsure of what to do. So this is what the Bridges thing is all about. We tell those stories, people share their stories to encourage others, and also, you know, people who've done it in other ways, because some people don't like the gym very much, and some people might do dancing. I see Catherine nodding here, or like swimming, and you know, so it might be whatever works for you. I had somebody last week who came in who just started dancing, and it transformed him. It was wonderful. So I think that's so important. We do here and we capture stories like yours. So your second point, when you mentioned fatigue as well, I see we've actually done a little bit of research into fatigue. We did some exploratory work and some focus groups and group interviews, and people seem to have different patterns. Some people are much better in the morning and can get everything. Some people are much better in the evening. It seems to be very personal. So it may well be it depends. You know, people, they talk about whether or not people are a lark or an owl sometimes, you know, in terms of when people function better. It's probably very personal to you. But I do see people like you who are better in the evening. So I'm not surprised by that at all.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Thank you. I have one question here in the front.
Yeah, thank you very much. Indeed, that's very useful. I have one little comment on this subject, which was just mentioned. My experience is that fatigue and the condition in the day is much better if I have some exercises in the very early morning, and then a shower, and then I get into some business and work, and that without this would be the whole day would be really rotten, forgotten. And yeah. Now I would like, my question is, what is an absolute no-go for people with CMT? What should they not do or avoid in order to, let's say, preserve their condition or avoid the degradation process to be quick?
It very much, I'm going to be really annoying now and say it depends on the person. So if I have somebody who comes into my clinic and they've got really bad foot deformity and they're getting along the pain, I'd be saying don't run, okay? That's fine. And I think it would very much depend on, if we're thinking about exercise, to be honest with you, participation in most exercise that isn't running if you've got foot deformity is actually okay, but you have to grade it to that person. So if somebody is very weak, I won't be getting them to do really heavy loads, for example. It has to, this is the thing with rehabilitation, and when we're prescribing exercise, we don't just give the same exercise to everybody. It's highly individualized, a bit like surgery is highly individualized, or orthotics is highly individualized. We have to do the same. It's not one pill. It's not one size fits all. So this is why even if you carry on in the gym on your own, but actually having a physio looking can give some advice on where you might want to start. And with the issue of fatigue as well, there's some beautiful work going on in the Netherlands at the moment across neuromuscular disease to do with exercise, and fatigue is something they've been looking at interventions for. And one of the rehab doctors there, Nicole Vert, she talks to people about who are very fatigued about start low, I mean like really low. And she says start low and go slow. So you start low. And I talk about, and Kathleen knows what I'm going to talk about now, about taking little exercise snacks through the day if people are very tired. We call it snackercise now. That's become our thing. But actually, you know, you can accumulate the benefits of exercise as well. And that's something that's been looked at beyond neuromuscular disorders. It's being looked at in lots of intermittent exercise is now gaining more traction just generally.